All right, I think that marks the go live button. We should be live and hopefully you can hear me. I am Dr. Boz and we are Tuesday night. I am back home in Tampa after what feels like a whirlwind for the last couple of weeks. We have a really great topic tonight that I hope you can already connect the dots on. How does Parkinson's, teenagers, and marijuana connect together? But if not, I will help you connect those dots. But first, we are going to have a few standards, and one of them is going to be my Dr. Boz ratio. As I show you loud and clear, thanks for that feedback. I really appreciate that. I have done some adjustments to my microphone with several of you saying that it really wasn't loud enough for many of you, despite turning the volume all the way up. So I've adjusted that and had a couple of sound checks there. I also am about to prick my finger and warn you that I have been on a cruise. Now, it was a low-carb cruise, but and the low-carb cruise doesn't mean they just serve low-carb food. You actually just get to have all these temptations in front of you, and your boatmates, shipmates that are keto help you stay consistent, but that doesn't mean we were any better. Actually, I did really good on the cruise. I did some character flaws that my husband was really irritated with, and that is I worked a little too hard the first couple of days. And then I was really putting in the time to, triple check my lecture, getting ready for my version of the low carb cruise. And I no more than got done with that cruise or that lecture, and I think it was a cup of coffee from one of those islands on the Caribbean that really did me under. Because it wasn't long after that. So 98 on my blood sugar, which does not surprise me at all. And ketones are probably going to be pretty low. Not terrible. That's better than I thought I was going to be. I will definitely, I'm looking forward to this because I'm hungry. I'm a little irritable. I got done with my lecture, had this cup of coffee that I think had a critter in it, because about half an hour later, I was puking between the bushes, and then about 48 hours later, I was trotting to the bathroom, which, thank God, the boat landed. But driving from one edge of Florida to the other, I think my husband found me about 9 bathrooms before I got to some antibiotics and said Montezuma's revenge was real. But I did not feel well at all, like really punk, until probably about 12 hours ago. So I wasn't sure. Thanks for calculating that, because I really didn't expect it to be that good. And I fasted all the way through yesterday, but ended up with a couple of bites of a hamburger because I just felt nauseated. And I didn't regret it a bit. I was like, so that burger tasted awesome. And then I did make it to today, but I'm not feeling good. But I have this great topic, and I want to share a few things with you. So I actually just posted in those comments there a link that is inspiring me to give this lecture tonight. I get prepared for this event, and it's been I was looking back at my notes the last time I gave this lecture live, and it was in 2019, right before the end of the year. So it's been over 2 years since I've given this course live. And I am so excited that Pella, Iowa has invited me to their town to really help them improve their universe of how do we raise folks with the best brains possible. That I'm totally a little nervous about being on stage. I was super excited on this low-carb cruise where I got a real live audience to watch and to read their body language and not just try to read what the comments are on the chat, which is kind of not always synchronizing with what I'm saying, as far as there's sometimes a delay. Looking out for technical issues. No, I was absolutely able to just watch the audience really respond to real live human questions where they look at me in the eyeball and I can look at their eyeballs. Dang, it was amazing. I really found such great energy from it. I have been working on gathering the questions that you guys write in, and knowing that there is there's some gaps in what I would love to teach about and what you want. But there are also some major overlaps of the stuff I like to talk about, the stuff I'm really good at teaching about. And Pella really sweeps together an amazing opportunity for me to get to do something I love to do. I really feel blessed to have this series, that it is offered as an online course, but this is truly a gift that Pella is sponsoring my attendance and supporting anybody who wants to show up in this beautiful little town in Iowa and learn about brains. We're going to give you a sneak peek of some of my favorite just subtexts. So if you do show up to Iowa and you've seen this lecture, don't give away the answers when you're there. I just want to make sure to go through a couple of other announcements before I hop into that, because I had this really awesome experience with the low carb cruise. And then the week before that, I had just the blessing of being able to go to the Metabolic Health Summit and watch an excellent, well-organized event for nerds, for nerds like me. And I sat there and listened to scientific lectures for hours. I read posters of people doing research, and it was great. It was so fun. I left husband at home because he's been drugged to that a couple of times. There's 2 interns in my office that are, again, blessing me with their kind of slave labor. They're paid internships, but that improvement in having somebody around to help problem solve and talk through. And then I had them come to this conference with me, which was far out of their league as far as what they've been to in the past, but it was great. They learned a lot. But I heard some horror stories of what's happened to some other conferences around the country where the organizers put together the events and they put forth the money and they rented and they wanted the people to come out of their pandemic isolation, and their events fell short. So I am doing my best to do my part here for the 2 places where I am scheduled to speak. And I can't tell you how much I'm in love with the way the leadership from KetoCon, and we'll talk about the next one in a second, but let's talk specifically about KetoCon and how well organized it is, how much energy they have around bringing together a group of people that think differently about health, and companies that have taken a risk that you'll buy into their ideas and their products and their education. And I'm one of those companies, but I have a couple of books and other things that help sustain that. If this doesn't go great, it's not fun. I really want to succeed, but I really want this organization to make sure that they have a successful event out of the gate for their first time back after the pandemic. Because those organizations that had these events that failed, I wasn't invited, and I didn't. I don't know much of the details about some of the reasons why it didn't work out, but it's because people didn't show up, and in many ways their leadership of their speakers did not promote it well enough. So I'm, Pella, Iowa is where I'm going to be next week, but I have been working on this lecture for KetoCon. It's the same one I gave at the small audience for the low carb cruise, and it was my debut. I was super nervous, but I was adding up the hours I've spent on that lecture, and it's over 100 hours of my time putting together the slides, really delivering a succinct message that hits the audience. That, again, an audience I've never met. I mean, I meet you here, but really you don't know your audience until you see them. And as I sat in front of them listening for 3 or 4 days before it was my turn to speak, I totally adjusted the lecture to make sure it was going to hit. And I do think I did a good job. I was really proud of how well things came together, and I got positive feedback that I can't wait to do it again. And I get to do that at KetoCon. So I am putting this up here for you to make sure that you see this is a big deal. July 8th through the 10th. I think the interns are going to get to come, but I have several of my teammates that are going to be meeting me. We work across the across the country, so we don't get to be together very often, but we're going to come together as a team. We have a really cool thing that we are going to debut. So the first 600 people that come to our table get a free. We are sponsoring. We are trying to do it. I'd love to be able to do it for more than 600, but that's all we could afford after everything else. And I really, I can't wait for the people that show up to come. So KetoCon has a footprint in really gathering innovators and companies with a dream and the courage to try to change how our country is delivering healthcare, but also delivering the message of improving health. So please support them. This ticket that uses a promo code, if you use the promo code, it's a benefit to you, and it sends a signal to the leadership in that organization that I am trying to help you sell your tickets and really sell out this event. Not only do I want to help you by sharing this information I'm going to share, but I also can't wait to show you what I've put some investment into, because it's a really cool idea. So I am, that's number one. Let me go to the next one, which is Orlando Summit, Keto Orlando Summit. And that is the following month. So that's August, right before the kids go back to school. I think I'm going to have the interns all at the interns, and I think I'm going to put some slave labor, about a couple of the other of my sons that are going to man the booth here to help deliver, again, another successful company. Keto Orlando Summit has been very well known for their organization of a community, and I've not been a part of it. So I've been welcomed into it, and my first introduction has been really, really positive. And now they're in my home state, so I can't wait to further that relationship and, again, support the companies that are putting forth the effort for real live human beings to come together as a community. And can you tell I'm a little hungry for this? I'm totally ready for people. So those are the biggest announcements. I do want you to continue to head over to our website and subscribe for our email list. This is something that we are sending out each week. We have a couple of series that we are working on over to plan out the rest of the year. But the way you get the notes from it and some of our own personal journeys is through those emails. It's also how we support our channel. We advertise for some reduced price on products or some promotional items, and we love it when you click on them. We love it when you read the emails and you give us feedback. As a team, we are learning this process, and it feels kind of lonely and ghost-like unless people reply to our emails. So we actually like that. Also, we are going to do this little lecture, but as I do this lecture, if you have an idea of a question, please put it in the comments. I'm looking at the comments right now, and I just want to say hi to Deborah. I got your personal note, and it made me tearful. So I was super thankful for your reply after she got a gift from being in the Neurons, and I wrote her a note, and she said, I love peopling too. And I just think that is a real connection. I wrote her a handwritten note, and she wrote a handwritten note back to me. It sounds very like 1900 Prairie Woman, but I loved it. I was great. I was like, yes, that's wonderful. So Darcy actually asked if there's CME connected to KetoCon or to Keto Orlando. So the CME stands for Continuing Medical Education. The one in Pella I know has continuing education units for counselors and for teachers. And I know the team in Pella has put forth the effort. Again, that's a free event. You just got to get to Pella. But, and I put the link in there somewhere. I'll post the link one more time just in case people didn't copy that from earlier. So I know those are there, but if you've ever looked into what it takes to get continuing medical education, I started that paperwork a couple of times, and literally about 40 hours of work went into trying to get that certification. And I just said, oh, good Lord, we're only about 10% done. And it doesn't look that way at the beginning, but it was just really heavy. So I'm proud to offer the continuing education units for the stuff in Iowa. It's not continuing medical education. You got to have a med school behind you for that, or an organization such as a med school. So I don't know about CME, but there are, for counselors and for educators, not only is the course great for you to steal the curriculum and use it in your classrooms or with your clients, but it is truly changes how you think about people and their brains. So let me get to the lecture. We're about a quarter after, and I want to make sure to do this in a succinct way. But if you do have questions, you can type them in about your in the comments, and my team will be taking care of that. All right, so I am going to start with just a few slides that I think if I do this, I'm going to go here. Let me actually push play here. We're going to do this two different ways, so just give me a second to resize a couple things here that I want to just not panic and do this in two layers by doing this and doing this and then doing this. Okay, so here is the first few slides. So we're talking, no, this is not a 90-minute lecture. You're going to see a link to that at the end of this. It is something I've been hired to do in the past, which is give the data on marijuana. But that's not what next week's all about. It really is about, does your brain work as well as you want it to? When I look at why I ended up in the ketogenic space, it wasn't because I was chasing ketones or weight loss. I was really looking at the fastest way to heal a brain injury. And in the midst of doing a protocol that I've been using for years, I was very gracefully course corrected that I needed to start with a higher level of anti-inflammatory chemistry inside the brain. So when I am looking at several of the scans that we're going to show you in the course of the day, I start by showing out these are SPECT scans. SPECT scans are not like CAT scans or MRIs where they show structure or maybe structure plus function, but they really are linked to your electrical, or it's not really electrical, but neuroelectrical or neural energy that's coming from the brain. So this is what a healthy brain looks like, and normal brains are supposed to be smooth. There shouldn't be any holes in them. And when you look closely at kind of orientating yourself for these images, I want you to follow the pink and think of eyeballs when you have pink. So that first layer there where I just placed the eyeballs is for that's looking down on somebody's brain. And if you looked at this image, it would be looking at the left side of their brain where the eyeballs are now in the front. Here's the image where we're looking like up under the underside of the brain. And then this would be a brain that we're looking at the right side of their brain. So brain activity over time, you'd think that's a normal looking brain. That's what I want my brain to look like. I'm 50 years old. But when you're looking at several of these scans, the aging of 0 to 80 and activity can be correlated with a decline, and people call that normal. Again, that's what 30-year-old should look like. If a healthy brain, it shouldn't have any defects in it. There's those eyeballs associated with the pink, but this would not be an uncommon image for a brain at the age of 50. So when I am, if I use my brain as an example, there's a section of my brain that I don't do very well. I demonstrate that each week when I try to do the Dr. Boz ratio. I don't do it very well in my head. I did learn long division like all of you, and I was very good at it, but then I haven't used it in years. And that little divot could represent the area of my brain that's needed for long division math. And I don't use it very often, so that doesn't work out. But if I would continue not to use it for the next 30 years, the size of the area of my brain that's not working would look that big. So that is a much bigger divot. So these areas where if you've had great development of your brain, we talk about learning new activities or using old activities, really do change how that looks. But when you look at a SPECT scan, this is what a stroke looks like. And I don't care how much you try to learn a new activity after the brain has been destroyed, there's only so much of it that can be restored. And although ketones and brain injury have some really fascinating science that has come out and was talked about at the Metabolic Health Summit for their advancement in their leadership and advancement in their research, once that brain is gone. But I want just to take a second. What medical condition do you think this is? And I'm going to go through this in Pella, Iowa. But so if you're there, you try not to give it away because it's very interesting to watch people discover it. This person is 41 years old. They are a male, and you can see that's pretty significant divots or defects in their brain. I like to give another hint that it is a very common diagnosis found in South Dakota. So I'm just going to pause while I have a sip of my ketones, and I'm waiting for anybody to place an answer of guessing. Alzheimer's or Lewy bodies. Thank you, Simply Human, for guessing. So I would love to. This diagnosis is not Alzheimer's, but it looks kind of like it. Someone else says Parkinson's, which would be another guess of a deteriorating brain. I just want to say he's 41. That would be really young for those problems. This is diabetes. This is what it looks like for chronic swelling of the human brain. And that swelling comes from elevated blood sugars consistently. I'm just saying hi to Ryan on stage for being present this morning at the group. He was a new member that came to the support group this week, and just love seeing folks come about and really look at their new community in Tampa. So thank you for coming. Other people had some good guesses. Here's another medical condition. Again, this one is a 29-year-old female. Just incredible lack of, that is a very damaged brain. Type in a guess if you haven't, if you have one. This is a 29-year-old female, and this case, the client died a couple years later. So somebody says an essential tremor. No, that's not. I mean, when I looked at this, I thought it's got to be a seizure patient. It has to be a seizure patient. So Deb says that's scary. It is very scary. 29 years old. When you hear what the defect is, I would love if somebody doesn't give me one more guess. One more guess. Meth addict. That's actually not a bad guess because they look pretty. This was actually anorexia, specifically anorexic. So that's a psychiatric issue, right? A mental health issue. But she had severely low iron. Like her ferritin was in the single digits, a ferritin of 8. So you cannot build the building blocks for repairing a brain unless you have iron. Iron, you have to start with iron. So this is a case where, my gosh, that's sad. So I think I have one more. Oh yeah, this is the 60-year-old brains again. Healthy brain is there. We have 2 other brains that are not normal. And I just wonder, 60 years old, I wonder if you could guess what those 60-year-olds have. And I do this because I'm trying to get you to engage in this. Not only does that help our comments, but I really want you to, guess and really when you do that, it creates emotion. So that is the way you remember things. If you want the best memory, why is it that elderly people, why is it the elderly people repeat certain emotional stories over and over again? It's because they're linked to emotion. The emotion roots a memory. So somebody says Alzheimer's and diabetes. Thank you for guessing on this one. A couple of other people said, do old people need iron? I'm like, yes, you cannot build neurotransmitters in your brain without iron. I can give you Prozac all day long. It will not work until your iron is replaced. You have to start with iron. So yes, Wild Tiger, 1951, guessed it right. One of them is Alzheimer's and one is overweight with sleep apnea, because the other major element of the human brain is oxygen. It's oxygen, people. So when I look at some of the findings of a case for how well does a brain work when it's got defects, well, if you feed it well, there are some things that it can really improve on quickly. But the parts that do sabotage progress, untreated sleep apnea is awful. Don't have that, don't do that, do not do that. It really is awful. Other things that are important we go through in this workshop. The workshop is truly one of my favorite things to do. It originated out of time that I was seeing patients in a jail. And the jail was very underserved, but it needed a whole bunch of things like love. It needed people to care about them and really do the education that was needed. So this curriculum that's found in this workshop that I'm going to be doing, it's also the foundation for What's in the Brains course that's on my website, but it's very expensive. I don't deny that. I want to gather the people who want to teach other people. And I think you should show this to every youth group. My 3 sons have had to come to the workshops that I lead. So let's get to the topic of tonight. I know we're already half past the hour, but I want to show you a couple of, so there's a whole lecture on how to use different fuels for the brain that I'm going to skip past. And I wanted to show this one. I'm going to pull it down here. So there is a part of the brain that I am going to start here and push play. Okay, so let's go back over here. Okay, so as I look at this next slide, oops, I need to advance over here. This is one of my favorite pictures. It's a picture of a teenage brain, and it has been swollen. It's showing you how many areas of a human brain will swell when you tag a chemical to swell it. If this were an adult, you would find there's 2 major sections deep within that primitive area. I guess I can't draw on this and you can't see. Their primary brain, their primitive brain, their inner brain, if you would, that would light up in the adult brain. But this is how many cells in a teenage brain are advancing and are maturing, actively maturing. In the adult, like in my 50-year-old brain, if I have these tiny little spots in my hippocampus, I'm lucky. But when the teenage brain is swollen, it stops maturing. So we have several brain injuries where they get hit with a baseball over their head, and the part of their brain that is linked to that swelling will stop growing. When I look at this 26-year-old male, this was actually a teacher, and he has some significant defects. He also presented in life. I didn't meet him before this. I met him in the middle of this story with one of the highest IQs that I've ever seen someone test. So incredibly smart, but was getting sent to my office because he was having his brain wasn't working right. And so you look at this and think, my gosh, what is it? A tumor? And the truth is he was a daily user of marijuana. So when I look at the next steps, I talk about how mice, I love doing this for the teenagers when I am, have you ever gone to one of those, what do they call them, junior achievements? And you're supposed to give a talk about what you do and inspire kids to do something. Well, I always talk about cutting off the heads of mice. Nothing like a squeamish story to get the girls irritated and the boys trying to be masculine. They're usually about 13 or 14. And I tell them that we study mice after they've been smoking marijuana. We put the teenage mice in a tent, and the tent has inhaled smoke that has marijuana in it. And we can see that their marijuana is going in them. And I said, well, how do you think that we we're going to cut off their heads and look at their brains at autopsy. The girls get all squeamish to see what do their brains look like at autopsy. And the super question is, well, how do we know if the mouse has smoked enough marijuana to affect their brain? And I mean, just to get them past the squeamishness is a little much. So how do we know how much dose of that THC has made it into their system? And I let them fester and fester and fester over what's the right answer. I make them guess a few times. But we talk about how THC is a fatty molecule, a fat-based molecule. And this image says, yeah, 60% of your brain is fat, but truly in healthy people, 80% of their brain is fat. The two other major areas for fat deposits are the testes and the ovaries. And everybody makes jokes about how the sperm associated with marijuana don't swim right, and it's a great way to castrate or to prevent pregnancy is just have them smoke marijuana, because the inflammation in their testes makes for abnormal looking sperm, and they're like blah 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 blah. It's funny. Wild Tiger 1951 says the mouse would get the munchies. Somebody always guesses that, but that's totally not the right answer about how we know. But keep guessing. So this fat-based system, you'll see on the side effects on social media go into how important it is for their brain or for their testes that will have this fatty organ that is very attracted to the fat-based molecule, the active ingredient of marijuana, which is THC, and the ovaries of a woman. And if you harvested those organs, you would see that, yes, those THC molecules do get into that fat-based organ, and then they get stuck. They get stuck because they're fatty. So then they have to naturally degrade in that area. And the question is, how long does that active marijuana component last in that fatty milieu? The same question is, well, how long is it lasting in their brain? And before you can cut their heads off and look in their brain, you got to get them to the right dose of marijuana. So how do you do that? Check the fat in the mouse. Tammy, you win. Yes, that's exactly what you do. You take a little needle and you do some liposuction to the mouse, and you pull out the fat cells and you squirt them onto a microscope, under a microscope, and you can see the THC beads. And there's some algorithm that says yes, as much as they want to hide from their use of marijuana. If you pull out a suction of fat cells, squirt it onto a microscope, you can see the THC in their fat cells of their tummy, their adipose under their skin, and it highly correlates with the amount of THC found in their brains. So when we look at marijuana and what it, let's see, I want to go to a different slide because I don't want to go through all this here. I think this one is, let me push play on this and see if this one does it. Yeah, so here is a neuron. These are the nerves in your brain. And let me just point out a few things. Those are neurotransmitters, which the chemical goes from one nerve to the next. But it's really important to point out the fat lining of a neuron. It really is insulation. That's the best way I describe it. And it's based on fat. You want a nice fatty insulation to have holes that don't, or messages that get where they're supposed to. Endocannabinoid receptors are found throughout our brain, and when you smoke marijuana, yes, THC binds to that endocannabinoid receptor. The sad part is if you inhale you put in a ton of marijuana, this fatty-based chemical also binds in the lining of those neurons, and then it's stuck like a shoe in mud. It's really stuck. I want to take this class. It's my favorite class. It is so good. Here's just a picture of the neuroendocrine chemicals that do cross that synapse, and it's just a fascinating way to see that your brain does send messages like that. This is how we feel. This is how we have euphoria. This is how we have an orgasm. This is how we have pleasure. This is how we feel sadness. Is those messages cross that gap, and they signal the next neuron. But dopamine is part of what makes us feel better. And when we look at dopamine, it will leave its little vacuole on one side. It'll bind to that receptor, and you'll see those little green molecules come out the other side. This is replicating its message. But the cool part about the human brain when it's healthy is that dopamine gets recycled back into that neuron so that we can then repackage it and use it again. And then we talk about the increased activation, cyclic AMP. I'm not going to really go into that right now. I want to get to the part where what happens in our human brains. You hear marijuana. We have these natural-looking receptors, and why would we have a receptor that looks just like marijuana if God didn't want us to have marijuana? I'm like, well, we could say the same thing about alcohol. We could say the same thing about opiates. We could say the same thing about many receptors. But when you look at the anandamide molecule, it does. It looks very similar to THC. The difference is that our brain uses the anandamide to cause a sense of calm, a sense of clear focus. I have many patients who've said, I use marijuana to touch in my creative side. And I'm like, you make a chemical that does that, but you have to recruit it and practice getting that recruitment of that natural chemical to bind. Because the downside of THC is that it lingers and it interferes. That's why the marijuana has such a potential to alter the normal brain development and function. It's called neuroadaptation. So this is the last little slide I'll do about this, but I think it's a great slide to say, let's just show you what usually happens. That anandamide binds to the endocannabinoid receptor, and it causes that message of cyclic AMP to go on to the next neuron. And you say, okay, that's how it's supposed to happen. Once the binding is over, though, that anandamide goes back in and it gets recycled into that vacuole, just like the dopamine or serotonin or norepinephrine would have done. When you inhale THC, it comes along and it binds in the place of that endocannabinoid receptor, and by golly, it stimulates that same cyclic AMP. But the problem is it's a chemical that lasts a really long time in a parking spot that it shouldn't. And when you do that to the human brain, you will eventually make less and less and less of that natural hormone in your own brain, and unfortunately it will take a higher and higher amount of this is a really long slide. It's a super cool slide, but I'm not going to go through it here tonight because I'll never have enough time for your questions. But that process of, if you just look up at the different ways, alcohol is affected by GABA, opiates are affected, nicotine is by your acetylcholine, the serotonin with your hallucinogens, your PCPs, and alcohol, glutamate, and then your endocannabinoid, where it really does stimulate dopamine. So does crystal meth stimulate dopamine. Crystal meth is actually a direct, that amphetamine there on the end, a direct stimulus. But the endocannabinoids do stimulate a downward upregulation of dopamine until they exhaust those receptors by constantly parking in them. I'm going to slide down to a couple places that how I get to teenage brains and the mice. So here is our little mouse that was smoking, and the answer was we checked his fat out, but when he was smoking that marijuana, the highest concentration that this marijuana went was his basal ganglia, including his hippocampus. And the more he smoked, the higher the concentrations of these areas, especially that cerebellum, the hippocampus, and then your basal ganglia. Again, cerebellum, I think it just is this thing that people say, but I can't express to you enough. If you would take the human brain and weigh it, and then you would pull off the cerebellum would outweigh the rest of the human brain. It is so neural dense. Like the number of neurons and interconnections that are needed in the cerebellum to function and to really give that higher level of function are directly related to that density of neurons in the cerebellum. And when you put a chemical in the human brain that stops the synapses throughout the cerebellum, we see that dysfunction happen more and more intensely. That there are other areas of the speech and executive function that it will also lie in, but the saddest part is the longer those THC beads build up, at first it's just in that speech center. So you can see a few of those blue balls. That's supposed to represent, when we cut the heads off of these mice and we look inside, we can see these excessive THC beads. When we go to send a message of how much marijuana have they smoked, where have the areas of speech lit up, I just think it's interesting to watch. So these are speech areas, these are smell cortexes, and how long does it take you to say a word depends on how quickly you can activate the cells in your brain and then send the message to your vocal cords. You don't even think about it, it happens so quickly. But when you have this high layer of THC beads in the way, the speech cortex, the speech center tries to send the message, it can't get through. It keeps running into either a broken part, and the message that is sent down the spinal cord is delayed. And that is the neuropathology for how does the speech pattern of someone using marijuana change. And this is the representation of what that looks like. So I'm not going to go into the next, there's 2 more slides I wanted to show that will loop this back, because this little hippocampus is a major part of the memory problems, especially those that are linked to the struggles of somebody with Parkinson's. And I like to show this. I'm not gonna pull out the full. I'm not gonna build this out because it takes too long. I'm just gonna show you quickly how this looks. There we go. So you look at peak plasma levels. When you smoke marijuana, it's there in 10 minutes. But these orally consumed marijuana. Whether it's your edibles or other, they still haven't, their onset is delayed. It peaks at a different height, so smoking it has a quicker peak, but the half-life is still 7 days. It will be in the urine samples coming out of those fat cells for up to 30 days, but you will find it in your fat cells for up to 12 weeks. So what does that have to do with the story that I've been trying to bring home? And that is, a healthy teenage brain looks like this. But when you look at the long-term effects of marijuana, it swells. Those are the areas of the brain that it swells. And it will stop the maturation of that brain for as long as that brain is swollen, for 3 months after they smoke that marijuana. That when I look at some of the most powerful statistics, this is the amount of marijuana that was in. This is the amount of marijuana that is in these different types of strains of marijuana. Woodstock, the amount of marijuana was there. 1970s, the potency in marijuana went up just a little bit. Very popular Kush Chronic went up to about 17% THC. Then we had some advancements in the way you could make the plants. Now you have extracts that are nearly 100% marijuana. And so it's like comparing 3-2 beer to Everclear. It's the potency of these, of the marijuana is so much higher than it was. And although we can talk about what it does to babies and their low birth weight and their increased startle effect, increased tremors. Those are my 2 little babies. This is actually my baby too when he was born. He's now 16. Is that crazy? But looking at that brain development and how much it affects the teenage brain and how full those functional MRIs, our functional MRIs now show that the brains of babies exposed to marijuana during pregnancy have a decreased cortical gray matter. The overall volume is less, especially with that intrauterine exposure to marijuana. All right, so I'm still need to tie this back to teenagers and Parkinson's. So the punchline of what does put all these 3 disorders together is your hippocampus. Your hippocampus is this very unique part of your brain that it actually has stem cell like effects, meaning you can grow hippocampus from you can grow hippocampal cells from hippocampal cells. It can regenerate itself. It's very slow in a brain like mine that's 50 years old. In a teenager, it's amazing what they can do when you remove that inflammation. So at the risk of only having a few minutes for your questions, I'm going to hop back over to this scene and say, here's my punchline. Here's what I was trying to get at is like, first of all, I love this topic. I love teaching about the brain. It's how I got into the ketogenic diet. And when I look at patients who have Parkinson's and they ask me, what is the most important thing that I can do now that I've been diagnosed with something like Parkinson's? And it is get that workbook that you can't see in this one. Let's see if I can turn the camera here. See that workbook there? That one right there. Get the workbook, fill out the workbook so that you can find that your anti-inflammatory effect is measurable and reversible. Chronic inflammation in the brain is what makes you at risk for Parkinson's. Using that advanced level of ketosis, this is not playtime for ketosis. You need to buckle down and give a high degree of improvement in the way inflammation has got into your brain and to get it out. If a teenager has come to me and said, what is the most important thing I can do to have the biggest, thickest hippocampus in the room? I used to work at a youth shelters, and I would give this lecture saying, who wants to have the highest chances of success? And you could actually predict success by who was the teenager that could grow the longest, thickest hippocampus. And every time you swell the brain, and the longer that swelling lasts, it stops the growth of that teenage brain, specifically the hippocampus, which is critical. I can't grow mine. If I regenerate some of my hippocampus, it will never be bigger than the volume I achieved by the age of 26. My brain was done growing. That hippocampus was done growing by the age of 26. So when my teenagers, I really did torture them and make them sit through these lectures and advance the slides, so they had to hear this stuff. A powerful improvement in that that space of how do you improve how do you get the best outcomes from a teenage brain? And my kids were. My children are not perfect, but they did have access and exposure to how do you have the healthiest brain, and that is a great sleep schedule and remove the inflammation so that you can achieve the largest volume of the primitive part of your brain, which does not stop growing until 26. And I'm always really careful to point out that if they have had some choices that swell their brain, whether that's a baseball to the head, football injuries. I've got a son that pole vaults and wrestles. So I think of his head injuries and really am careful about saying, if you get a head injury, you really need to do what your mother tells you to reverse that. But truly that if they've had marijuana, if they've had alcohol, that does swell the brain. And it stops the growth of all of that beautiful, intricate image that I showed you just a minute ago. Every cell, let me do this again, go to here. Every cell on that that's lit up there is swollen when they drink alcohol. Every cell is swollen when marijuana was tagged to what areas of the brain does and that stops growing for as long as the brain stays swollen. Remember, that THC stayed in their brain for 3 months. 3 months, and it stopped the swelling, or stopped the growing. You cannot resume the growing. No human brain. We've tried to stimulate the brain to make it grow, and it makes deformed cells. It will not divide again until the inflammation is gone. And when I look at the third part, so hippocampus, how does Parkinson's, teenagers, and marijuana have, what do they have in common is they are very impacted by, hippocampus is the most impacted by those conditions. When someone is trying to improve their choices or come off of marijuana, really clean up their brain, I'll tell them, the best thing you can do for that hippocampus, we have to get your hippocampus without inflammation, is to be put in a state of ketosis, stay there. And then there's other things we work on as they withdraw from that marijuana. But it's a powerful reversal process in advancing that brain healing and help. All right, so that's a long stretch for tying those three together, but I think I did it. So give me your comments if you like this kind of geeky stuff. But I do have an end screen that I'll be putting on this video that I don't like haters, but I do like educating people about marijuana. So the only way that you can get to this video will be on the end screen here. It's going to be unlisted, so you'll have to click the little end screen to get to it. You cannot search it and find it. I don't have it public. It's just, I don't want the haters. Anyway, I am, so we'll post that for you after this live show. Let's get over to your questions, and I'll probably go a little bit longer just because that took me a really long time. Leave it to Tammy to give me a really good message. Okay, so these are keto questions. Remember, we're going to shift topics here and say, okay, they don't have to be keto questions, but I'm hoping they're easy keto questions for me. When I look at if glucose is staying low and client feels good, but blood ketones keep reading high on the meter, does she continue to fast through these highs if she feels good? Her Dr. Boz ratios are easily 8, 10, 12. So those are great ratios. The key thing when you have that high of ketones, I would make sure that they calibrate their ketone meter. I've had a couple of times where it didn't make sense. And I wonder if I have one of these in here. I know that ForaCare has a calibration meter that this needs to be recalibrated. All the meters have them. They have a way of calibrating, so I would check that. But the good news about a ketone that would be that high is your body can't store ketones. And as long as you can pee them out, there are a couple of extreme medications that are for diabetes that can cause a euglycemic, meaning the glucose is stable, but the ketones go high. And so there are a couple of medications that if they're on diabetic medications, they should talk to their doctor if that's happening. But if that's not the case, then it's usually a metabolic flex that her she's fasting, she's flexing her metabolism, and she's already has a pretty good revved up system right now. I have some of the slides that I'm working on for teaching people how to get out of a stall in ketosis. And I worked on them on my cruise, and I just love the way they turned out for not only helping my brain sort to say, how do I teach this to somebody so I can show them what I'm thinking? But when you stress a metabolism, and Tammy's really good about coaching people through don't let them off easy, give them the truth about how do you help them feel better, and it usually means that you've got to say some of the truths. So when you have such success like this, they've got great numbers, this is the opposite problem that we usually have. The answer is they're usually pushing that metabolism and they're flexing, and that's wonderful, but it will settle down. So sometimes if they're nervous, just tell them not to fast for about 3 weeks. This is going to go away. They will settle down. If they're fasting and flexing those numbers because they're trying to reach for a higher metabolism layer of metabolic health, like autoimmune problem they're trying to review, so chronic fatigue, some of those sluggish brain things, I wouldn't stop for that reason, especially if they're feeling good. But it's a really good question. Tammy also says, how many naltrexone shots should you count on needing to break addictions? How many are safe to get in a row? How do we best help that chemistry through? It's a great question, and that leads right into what I talk about in this addiction course. Naltrexone is a very powerful treatment for rewiring a brain that is stuck in an addictive cycle. If one of my kids or somebody I loved was in a addictive life, and I got to be queen of the universe and say this is what's going to happen, they would get a naltrexone shot for the better part of 5 years. They last a month. They're very expensive, but they stop the dopamine from the so dopamine comes from the neurons that are the most developed. So the neural pathways in the brain where they just keep reaching for dopamine over and over and over and over and over and over again, over and over and over again. It's because that development of their brain has practiced producing dopamine, and their brain is doing it over and over and over. So even when they want to get pleasure from meditation or relationships or sex or things that are healthy, they get it just from alcohol, just from opiates, because they produced that area of the dopamine production. So the question is, when you're treating people with this, how long can you go? And you go until their brain doesn't have the craving anymore. Often money is what limits them because it's expensive. But I mean, I don't let them when I would do my addiction protocol for patients, I would make them prepay for 6 shots, because it's a minimum of 6 months, but almost nobody can rewire their brain faster than 6 months, even on a bed of ketones. Great questions. Really good questions. Dang, you gotta love Tammy. Becky says, is a carb? Does it matter what type of food your 20 grams of carbs come from? Well, so I just did a video on fiber this past week, and some people really got their emotions high on that one. So if you haven't checked out that video, I would encourage you to go look at that, Becky, where it really does outline that some carbs are going to produce a higher glucose response in people. What I would do to say, am I okay? I'm looking at what happens to your body when you eat those carbs. There are some the short answer is yes, the carbs are different. They are not just a carb is a carb. I like to sort them by particle size. So the smaller the particle size, the more processed the food, the more the carb stimulates insulin. Now, I've had some people tell me, well, honey's not very processed. I'm like, well, that's like straight sugar. That's going to shoot your sugars way up. And if you think honey's not affecting you, well, check your blood sugar fasting. Take a teaspoon of honey. Check your blood sugar at 30 minutes, an hour, and an hour and a half, or 90 minutes, yeah. You'll see that it stimulates the daylights out of your sugar and your insulin, and you'll feel it. You'll feel fatigued afterwards. So yes, carbs are made differently. I think of particle sizes, but if you really want the chemistry behind how that works, you got to check your sugars after you eat it. So take the carb that you're curious about, check your blood sugar fasting, and then eat your carb. Look at that at 30 minutes, 60 minutes, and 90 minutes, and see what your blood sugar does. The videos I have coming out on that, will really help explain what I'm talking about there better. So thank you for... Okay, have you studied microdosing on Liberty caps, though? Someone recommended this for chronic pain. I'm drinking alcohol for pain currently, as my doctors give me medications to make me like a zombie. I had a suicide headache, also known as a cluster headache, for 15 years, 5 days a week. Yeah, so microdosing is with the THC. And what they're looking at is, well, if I put this in their brain, it will swell that part of the brain. And indeed, they feel better for a while. But did you know that if we would swell your brain after a head injury, there is parts of the brain that will work better during the swelling? But the long-term impact is very well studied, very well studied. And it's not a place for me to be contentious about. It sounds like there's a lot of suffering going on. I would highly encourage you to take the brains course and just learn about, and maybe the person that needs to take the brains course in your life isn't you. It's somebody whose brain is healthy enough to comprehend it and to help you walk through it, and somebody that you trust. All right, so we are going to call that a night, because I really pushed my luck on talking about brains too long. You can tell I like that. So again, I'm going to put that link to Pella there next week. And anybody who can, maybe not. I thought I had the link. If one of my teammates could really, if one of my teammates can post that Pella link for me one more time, that would be great. Or anybody that can scroll back up, grab it, and repost it, that would be nice. I'm going to check my numbers. And again, Montezuma's revenge was really hard on me. I technically had 2 bites of a a hamburger last night, so I really have only fasted 24 hours instead of my usually 48. I do want to say thank you for those folks that came out this morning to the support group. The Pin Chasers, which is the bowling alley in the parking lot out here, is under construction, and so we got to have it was actually a very intimate setting where it wasn't, oh, I misunderstood his question. I'm so sorry. Have you studied she want microdosing? I guess I did misunderstand it. I'm sorry. That's the hardest part about this, is doing too many things at once. All right, I'm going to check my numbers, and I will ask for your grace and forgiveness for not reading that correctly, Mr. 247. So this is ketones counting down, and this is my glucose counting down. And I do this not just because I like poking my finger, but because if you are taking ketone supplements, so 2.2 to 2.4 in an hour, blood glucose did decrease. That is what it looks like. That is an expected response. I don't know if you saw how I did try to actually get the ketones in earlier in the hour, so it's been a pretty good amount. I can feel them rising. If I would wait another 10 minutes, I bet that would be about 2.8. But when I talk about the circulation of ketones decreases blood sugars, this is an example of what that looks like. That it is not a theoretic. You can prove this in your own system. And when you have ketones in circulation, you should be able to measure their increase. If you cannot measure it, you're getting scammed. I do this live to show you. There's a lot of science behind increasing how your body metabolizes fuels. And when you're stuck, you cannot be on the ketogenic diet if you're not burning ketones as part of your fuel. So no matter how low you cut your carbs, if you're not producing ketones, you're not on a ketogenic diet. If you're stuck in an insulin resistance spiral death trap where you can't seem to get out of that insulin resistance, this is what I tell my patients to drink, is ketones in a can. So find those on our website. We really appreciate your support. And as Michelle and I continue to write these emails for you guys, honest to God, it is so nice to get the praise that you guys share for what we do. I will continue to check in on Tuesday nights, and we will I'll look for your feedback on how you liked this type of lecture. So I am Dr. Boz, improving your health one ketone at a time and reversing those medical problems with healthy keto living.